Terror hits the United States financial capital out of the clear blue sky.
And then it strikes again, directly into the Pentagon. The attacks are unimaginable, the perpetrators unknown, and the casualties are unthinkable. But the U.S. president insists the American spirit has survived.
Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America.
Now, panic in the streets turns into a frantic search for survivors as rescue crews pick apart piles and piles of rubble. Hello, I'm Jonathan Mann.
And I'm Relitza Vasilova. Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Tuesday's terrorist attacks in the United States. Massive search and rescue operations are underway in New York and Washington, the sites of devastating and experts say coordinated attacks that shook the United States on Tuesday. We want to show you the latest pictures now from Lower Manhattan. Parts of the once bustling financial district have been reduced to rubble. Officials haven't even hazarded a guess as to how many bodies may be buried there. Estimates run into the thousands. But there's also hope for survivors. There are reports that cell phone calls are coming from beneath the debris. Already several injured people have been pulled from the collapsed buildings.
Now let's take a look at the latest video of the attacks on the World Trade Center. You'll see a hijacked airliner slamming into the South Tower Tuesday morning. Now the same scene slowed down. It was the second jetliner crash. A different plane had struck the North Tower minutes earlier. The towers collapsed shortly afterward, and later so did a 47-story building in the World Trade Center complex.
U.S. President George W. Bush learned of the attack while he was visiting an elementary school in Sarasota, Florida. His plan to talk about education changed immediately. Mr. Bush was whisked away and flown around the country, stopping at military installations in Louisiana and Nebraska before finally returning to the White House at dusk. Once there, he addressed the nation and the world.
The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shattered steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve.
At the U.S. Defense Department, the feared toll is shocking. Authorities say 100, perhaps 800 people are missing. A tally from area hospitals shows at least 73 people were wounded when the hijacked jet slammed into the Pentagon, causing part of it to collapse. 64 people were aboard the flight, and all are presumed dead. Part of the building is still burning at this hour. Firefighters are not expected to be able to extinguish all of the flames until daylight. Government sources tell CNN that the hijacked airliner that crashed in western Pennsylvania was headed for another government target, possibly the White House, the Capitol, or the Camp David presidential retreat. It's unclear how the flight was diverted from its target. The sources say members of Congress were told that authorities are confident the evidence so far points to Osama bin Laden.
We want to take a moment now to give you another look at some exclusive video from the scene of the attacks in New York City. Here you just saw the American Airlines Flight 11 as it slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And these pictures show the second plane, United Airlines Flight 175, crashing into the other tower 18 minutes later. Meticulously planned, very well coordinated attacks. Rescue crews are working through the night in New York City, combing through the rubble of the collapsed buildings. CNN's Garrick Utley joins us now live with more on that. Garrick.
Really, it's shortly after 3 o'clock in the morning here. We hope in a few hours with daylight, officials may start to be able to give us on this new day some more specific ideas to what casualties will rise to here in New York City. The Mayor Giuliani, said they're going to be in the thousands. They're going to be horrendous, more than we can possibly imagine. But as of right now, just witnessing some of these pictures we were seeing a moment ago, those planes crashing into the Twin Towers, of course, the thing that's foremost in our minds, the trauma, really, the shock, is the human cost, the casualties. But there's also something else that has been lost. The buildings themselves. What are these buildings? It may sound very materialistic, but look at some of them here and what they mean to our lives. They are more than just steel or stone. They represent what the nation is. They become and have become iconic landmarks that do mark the land, that do define us. That bridges and roads are the arteries. We are so vulnerable because we depend on them. The Empire State Building has been a symbol for decades in New York and around the world. And of course, the two towers that were there until early yesterday morning. And now we see what brought them down. The first jet 8:45 on Tuesday morning. And then what followed? The terror followed by the unbelievable. The collapse of the towers, more than 100 stories going down like the proverbial cliche deck of cards. But why did these buildings collapse? Buildings that went up only 30 years ago, that should last for a century or more. It wasn't the explosion, the force of the two planes, structural engineers tell us. It was the heat. The flames there burned too long and too hot, rising above 1,500 degrees. It began to melt the steel. And the floors in the towers were connected to the steel skin on the outside. And as that steel literally melted, that floor gave way, fell on the next, and down they came. That was the structural failure. They were not built to withstand more than 1,500 degrees of heat caused by two planes fully laden with gasoline flying into them on this day here in New York. And now we just look downtown at where they were, the former towers standing there, those landmarks known around the world, nothing but a plume of dust and the searchlights for rescue workers there this evening. But again, this is really the story of people, those trapped there and on the airplane and in the Pentagon. And Maria Hinojosa of CNN's New York Bureau looked at what happened today from the perspective of the street.
At Ground Zero, running in the streets is the only form of escape. But on those same streets, the chaos and vibrations couldn't be avoided. Further north, New Yorkers gathered at Times Square. In humble silence and disbelief, everyone looking up to the big screen. Downtown, the mass exodus began.
I saw everybody crying in the streets, saying their prayers and crying. I saw different races, nationalities, and creeds that usually have differences with one another come together and bond and love and respect.
Along Fifth Avenue, people flooded to the streets to watch together.
Oh my God, it's inside the first building.
The faces of New Yorkers, solemn, quiet, praying. A father trying to give security to the innocent ones. The tiniest of faces, protected. Streets filled with anger and shock.
I have never witnessed nothing like this in my entire life. Human beings, parents, daughters and sons jumping out of the window at least from 80-something floors. None of you want to witness that. I'm traumatized for life.
The street where now everyone shares the pain out in the open without shame. The street where office chairs have become eerie stretchers outside a hospital.
We've had multiple types of injuries, from severe burns to blunt injuries and multiple fractures.
The street where a depleted mayor summons some strength.
New York City is a lot stronger than this, and we're going to overcome it, and the people of New York City are going to give an example of how you stand up to terrorism. You just don't be afraid.
But Times Square is empty, the streets are silent, and a city mourns. Maria Hinojosa, CNN, New York.
And this evening, down in Lower Manhattan, this has been the scene, the rubble, the wreckage, as rescue workers continue with their search. But there's been so much dust, there is so much rubble there, that even the police and the rescue workers who come in with trained dogs trying to sniff out human life say the dogs have lost the scent because of the smoke and the dust. We do know, according to officials in New York City, that at least 300 members of the New York Fire Department are missing. Entire units, entire battalions have been lost in the rubble. 80 or more New York City policemen and women are also missing and believed lost. And those pictures speak for themselves. More than 100 stories, suddenly nothing. And just moments before these towers collapsed, some of the families and the loved ones of those who had gotten into their offices early on this morning, on that Tuesday morning, had talked with them by telephone. We've had reports from a number of sources that those on the upper floors, up on the 100th floor, people working for a stockbroker, knew what was happening beneath them when the plane crashed into the building, knew they could not get down through the fire escape. And more than one, we are told, called his wife to say goodbye. This rescue worker, his body language says it all. And so does this. And so does this. And now, New York City, Manhattan, has a new landmark. And there is silence there in Lower Manhattan. John and Relitza, back to you now.
Garrick, is there any hope that beneath that rubble and destruction, someone could have survived?
Hope, yes, of course. We've had some reports from the mayor and other city officials that they have been getting some cell phone calls from victims in the rubble. It's not clear exactly where they are. Of course, we remember the two towers went down more than 100 stories each, but also a third skyscraper, not nearly as tall, less than half that height, also collapsed earlier this evening. And it's thought that perhaps in that building or even in some other buildings that have been blocked by rubble, there are people still alive. But how many, no one can say. You looked at that devastation there, and each of us, I think, can come to our own conclusions.
And
the live picture of where the World Trade Center once stood.
And we still don't know how many have died.
And we will not know until tomorrow at the very earliest, and even then it's only going to be estimates.